We've got some really distinguished panelists here to speak with us today, and in a moment we'll get to that. My name's Cliff Bradley. I'm one of the people that have been organizing on this forum, and one of the issues that have been close to my heart over the years is issues of trade and equity and fairness. One of the things that never ceases to amaze me is the absolute hypocrisy of the rich countries of the North embracing free trade, because none of the rich countries of the North got rich through free trade. They got rich through protecting their own markets and in developing an internal economy first. And that doesn't seem to be allowed anymore in the rest of the world. So we have some people here with us today who is going to talk to us about some different models for how trade might work, and educate us on some of the conditions that are going on now and what ways we might do things better. Actually, I'm not even sure what order you guys have agreed to speak in, but who's going first?
I think I'm going first.
Okay, Neil Sorensen is with the Institute for Ag and Trade Policy in Minneapolis, been involved in many issues over the years, just as the name implies, agriculture and trade issues. And with that, take it away, Neil.
Do I need to move these things?
I think that'll pick up, okay.
All right. Well, like you said, my name's Neil Sorensen. I work with a program on globalism and global governance at the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy. We're located in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We now have about 45 full-time employees, and our programs kind of run the gamut of agriculture and trade policy issues. There's 5 of us in the Global Governance Program. We have our Senior Program Associate from Ecuador, Chela Vasquez, working on genetic resources issues. We have Shiny Varghese from India working on water issues and water rights. We have Shefali Sharma working in the Trade and Information Project in Geneva for WTO issues, and then Kristen Dawkins, who is our Vice President of the Institute, that has written extensively on genetic resources, patents, and intellectual property rights. We also have a forestry program, an environment and agricultural program, industrial aquaculture program, and a whole range of activities that we try to work with farmer groups from all over the United States and internationally to support sustainable farming communities locally and worldwide. I wanted to start off talking about fair trade, with a kind of a personalized experience of what it means to me to have fair trade, or what can facilitate fair trade. Okay, when I was young, my parents would tell me stories that when they were children, they had a very different kind of diet, way of sustenance than people in the U.S. now have. They and other people their age, and they're now in their late 50s. They've told me stories about how eating oranges and bananas and all these exotic kind of fruits was very uncommon, and in fact that they received maybe a couple bananas or oranges as Christmas presents, and the rest of the year they didn't have such things. They maybe had apples or canned fruit and such. So just keeping that in mind, that all these exotic things that we have now, and I'm sure in Missoula, you go to the grocery store in mid-January, you're going to be able to get avocados from Venezuela and any pineapple from Chile, and who knows, it's all available at your fingertips and for cheap prices, and most people don't really think about the distance that the food's traveled, or what their grandparents and parents lived through and how they lived. it's kind of taking for granted the types of resources that are here now, or what effects they have on economies in other countries. My neighbor, he's about an 86-year-old a World War II veteran, was telling me a story the other day about his experiences during the Great Depression. And one of the things that he was telling me was that they used to shoot and trap and eat squirrels in the city of Minneapolis just to get by. They would dig up cattail roots and serve that to their family members. They did whatever they could to get by, and this is a whole generation of people that struggled and to survive and just to make ends meet, and he talks to me, and a lot of other kind of World War II era, Depression era people have talked to me about, it freaks them out. They're afraid to think what would happen if there's another crisis, or if there is another Great Depression. That there's so little self-reliance that they see in young people these days, that if a crisis were out there, they talk about what are they going to do? Are they going to go around and loot and steal from people, or what's going to be the solution to the inability to provide for your own sustenance? And so, and in terms of what he's saying, I ask myself the same question: what are we going to do if we can't provide for ourselves, or or we're totally relying upon imports from everywhere else? I count myself lucky as having grown up in a family where we had a large garden. We produced a lot of our own fruits and vegetables and resources. We canned and froze just about everything. We had a sweet corn field at my grandparents' farm that the whole family divvied up, and what was left over we made cream corn out of and ate the entire winter. We cut and chopped wood and burned exclusively off of wood heat, which was hard work, and I kind of resented it when I was a kid, but now I really respect the fact that I had to do these things. I think developing a world where fair trade is the norm, it's going to take a lot of work on all fronts. And but one of the things that I would argue is that the foundation for inequitable trade is a lack of self-reliance and kind of wasteful behavior by Western imperialist countries, historically and current day imperialist countries, the United States, Australia, Europe, when they define the living standard, what countries have a high standard of living? They say the United States, Sweden, and whatever. These countries have a high standard of living, and one of the main parts of the definitions of what it means to have a high standard of living is the amount of leisure time to have. The time that you have to sit around and do nothing is one of the main components of having a high standard of living. And I think that indices as of being able to go watch TV and going shopping and traveling long distances to tropical islands and doing these types of activities and behaving in this way, it completely demonizes having this idea that living in this leisure fashion. It kind of demonizes the things that need to be done to live in a way that's sustainable and supports fair trade. this is an example that I often use of as a main indicator of how sustainable lifestyles are demonized. Is the social pressure to have a lawn, weed-free, green lawn. As you look around everywhere in America, everywhere I've been, there's this insanity, this insane notion that you should have only grass, and that failure to do so is a breach of a strong social mores. And every lawn, as far as I'm concerned, every lawn, boulevard, park has the capability of producing vast quantities of food everywhere you look, and we could use that as a way to increase our self-reliance, to take away the reliance on San Joaquin Valley. 90% of our vegetables in the wintertime come from there, and Mexico and other countries where they don't have the same rules for DDT and other pesticide. We banned the use of DDT in agriculture in the 70s, but we continue to produce it and export it for other countries, despite knowing the fact that it's extremely poisonous. But it comes back to us, and we're eating it every winter, and it still has the same negative consequences on our ecosystems and our health. And with keeping these things in mind, there's a number of initiatives that are underway or that need to be taken to increase fair trade and fairness in trade in general. And one such initiative will be the elimination of dumping agricultural and other commodities particularly on developing or underdeveloped countries. Dumping is defined as capturing more market share by lowering the price to be lower than the full cost of production. And the United States and Europe and other westernized countries are the major countries that do these things, provide huge, massive export subsidies to enable large corporations like Archer Daniels Midland and to Cargill to export commodities to other countries at ridiculous costs that undermine their markets. Other countries do it as well. There are other countries that have export economies like Brazil and to some extent Thailand and a few other countries, but for the most part it's westernized countries that do these things. To eliminate dumping export commodities, we should be selling commodities at or above the full cost of production, and we have to answer two questions in order to do this. We need to determine the actual full cost of production, and then we have to also determine a timeline for phasing out dumping on an international level. Calculating the full cost of production includes the amount of expenses paid by producers plus the amount of subsidies paid by taxpayers. And the average cost of production is already being determined each year by all major exporting countries. And the cash value paid by taxpayers has been calculated for most crops by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, and they've done a pretty good job of calculating that amount. But it does not include the opportunity costs, the social and environmental costs of production. They're not included in the OECD models. and they need to be taken into account to be able to eliminate dumping in any sustainable, fair way. So eliminating dumping could bring immediate improvements for countries devastated by imperialist Western policies. So that's one significant way, in a way that Mark Ritchie, the president of the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy, has been integral in pushing forth around the world this idea of eliminating export subsidies and dumping. I don't know how much time I have here, but I'll take a few more minutes to talk directly about fair trade and the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy relation to it. We do have an initiative called Peace Coffee. It's a kind of a subsidiary of the Institute. And I know you'll be talking about their own fair trade coffee initiative in Seattle, but we do have the Institute started this fair trade coffee initiative. We do sell certified organic fair trade coffee to co-ops and coffee shops all over the Twin Cities, Minneapolis area. They're delivered by bike, and Peace Coffee is part of a nationwide cooperative of cooperatives that pools its resources to buy full containers, like 50,000 pound containers of green or organic coffee, organic fair trade coffee, and this has enabled them to get fair trade coffee out far and wide, and now they're moving into working with Ethiopia. Now, predominantly, it's been mostly in Latin America, and now they're the first shipment of certified organic fair trade coffee from Ethiopia is on its way. It's another huge. So that's a significant step. Ethiopia is the center of biodiversity for coffee. That's where coffee comes from, and so that's a significant step in the fair trade movement, and developing an association with. It's what in Ethiopia they have a slightly different model than some of the other models. They also have a cooperative of cooperatives, kind of a overall farmer cooperative. And I think at least for coffee and chocolate and some of the other commodities, fair trade is rapidly expanding, and it provides really good benefits for farmers socially and environmentally, and I'm sure both of our panelists will be able to address that. As regards the Fair Trade Labeling Organization, it's the overall organization that sets the standards, and that was developed in 1997 after about 25 years of kind of disparate Max Havelaar fair trade movements and different kind of fair trade labeling schemes around the world, but primarily in Europe and to some extent the United States. They've developed a pretty well coordinated fair trade system, and just recently in 2000, after 3 years of experience, they've started to do a restructuring program, realizing the kind of inadequacies in a movement that's in its infancy. I'll talk slightly about the different things that they're doing to make the Fair Trade Labeling Organization more credible. They're moving towards having high quality and independent certification, and trying to harmonize the fair trade standards. Currently, there's many different sets of standards that are all very similar, but still nonetheless have different requirements. And so they're working on making sure that they're all in tune with one another. And they're also trying to improve the marketing of fair trade products. And I think the most important part of the restructuring of the Fair Trade Labeling Organization is the integration of farmers, of the producers, into the leadership of the Fair Trade Labeling Organization. Now, the farmers are going to be on the board, like a third of the membership of the board, the certification and the appeals committee, the standards policy and working group, and I think that this is a very important move towards making sure that the sustainability and overall credibility of the Fair Trade Labeling Organization as a developing institution, and also establishing the third-party certification system, which has been the hallmark of organic farming over the last 75 years. I guess I've been going on for quite a while, and I do want to say, and maybe during the discussion period we could talk about the importance of cooperatives as being the conduit to developing and supporting a fair trade movement, and particularly in Missoula or anywhere for that matter, and where you can decide and say, this is our cooperative. Our cooperative is only going to support organic and fair trade products, and I think that's a way to keep the benefits in the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Neil. You're next, Jeremy. We may want to move. Yeah, trade. Yeah, that might work best to this trade seats. Jeremy's from Seattle with a community group for social justice in Seattle. As we said, worked in a number of fair trade campaigns, and is here to tell us about that. So welcome, Jeremy.
Thank you. So I'm going to focus in a little more on coffee, starting off where Neil was talking about, and talk a little bit more about how coffee is an excellent example of both the disaster of how the global economy can work, and also the potential for how much better it can work in the future. Now, as Neil was talking about, I'm going to be drawing up here on this a little bit. So if anyone in the back, if you can't see, I encourage you to move up. As Neil was talking about the cost of production, right, and how bad it is when farmers are getting paid less for their harvest, and they actually have to invest into producing it. That's exactly what's happening in coffee, and it's hurting coffee farmers, millions of coffee farmers around the world. To give you a very a very sort of sketchy diagram here, like many agricultural products, the price of coffee on the world market is really volatile, and it's constantly going up and down, right? It's traded on a commodity market, kind of like, like a stock market where people are trading and always trying to get the best deal. Well, for the past couple of years, because there's a massive overproduction of coffee on the world market, prices are hitting rock bottom. And right now, coffee is being traded on the world market at about 50 cents a pound. Now, that's bad enough. I mean, just a few years ago, it was up at like $1, $1.50, $2 in the past decade or so. Right now, coffee is selling at about 50 cents a pound on the international market. If this is 50 cents, though, see, this is 50 cents, right? That's what goes to the exporting companies in Mexico or Jakarta or whatever country it is that's exporting the coffee, right? There's an exporting company that gets it 50 cents. Well, they take a cut of the money when they buy it from the sort of regional processors. And those regional processors take a cut of the money when they buy it from the local local coyotes, or what they're called in Latin America, the middlemen. They're called coyotes because they're sly and they steal, right? So in the end, with all these cut after cut after cut of the products from coffee, you're getting farmers for making between 20 and 30 cents per pound for their coffee. Now, on the global scale, it typically costs about 70 to 75 cents per pound to produce it. So it's not hard to do the math. You know, no matter how hard coffee farmers are working right now, they can work day in and day out as they have been doing for generations and centuries. And no matter how much they work, and no matter how good their coffee is, they're still going to lose money because they have to invest about 75 cents per pound, and they're only making 20 to 30. So it's not hard to imagine what the result of that is. With people losing so much money, small farmers around the world are going into debt. They're pulling their kids out of school, you know, to have more labor, and because they can't afford schools or supplies or anything, they're going hungry. I mean, very literally going hungry, and usually they've always had limited access to healthcare and education, but that essentially just disappears. I'll give one particularly heartbreaking example before we can sort of move on to the brighter side of the story. Last year, about a year ago May, it hit the papers that 14 Mexican immigrants died in the Arizona desert trying to cross the United States. Now, of course, because of the ravages of the global economy on Mexico, there are people coming north all the time out of economic desperation, and there's people dying on the border all the time, just trying to find a decent life for themselves and find work to support their families. Well, these 14 people died all at once, and for once, the newspaper started paying attention, right, to this problem of immigrants dying on the border. As it turned out, 8 of those 14 people last year were coffee farmers from the state of Veracruz. And their families said, yeah, all of our sons, all of the men of our community are having to leave town and move north to find work because our product that we've been growing for generation after generation, we can't live on anymore. That's the bad news. Now the good news is there is a workable alternative that is growing by leaps and bounds in the United States and around the world, and that's fair trade. Through fair trade certification, instead of allowing coffee companies to pay the lowest possible price, right? Your Folgers or your Starbucks or your whatever kind of companies in the United States and other countries that import, instead of them paying the lowest possible price and really cheating the farmers out of their quality coffee, fair trade sets a standard of $1.26 per pound, a minimum price of $1.26 per pound, which is what it really takes for farmers to be able to feed their families, invest money in their farms, and send their kids to school, etc. Right? So through this price, fair trade farmers, and there are about 300 cooperative associations around the world that represent, I can't remember how many hundreds of thousands of farmers. I think it's 200,000 farmers and their families around the world that are representing these fair trade cooperatives. When they're fair trade cooperatives and their coffee is bought at fair trade prices, they're guaranteed $1.26 per pound, which a number of fair trade coffee farmers that have come to the United States in the past year or so have told these stories, have been on sort of regional speaking tours, and they've said, look, before fair trade, our kids were lucky if they finished second grade. None of us had shoes, and we were lucky if we got to put salt on our tortillas for dinner. Like that was the dressing for our dinner, was actually to put salt on our tortillas. But since we've been selling our coffee to the fair trade market and getting this fair price, our kids are going to school. They're finishing elementary school. They're finishing junior high school. Some of them, in some communities, the first kids ever are going to college. They're establishing their own. Many fair trade coffee communities are establishing their own health clinics. They're for the first time, buying mules and trucks and buses and forms of transportation so that they can actually get their coffee to market without carrying 100-pound sacks down mountain ranges. And their quality of living and the dignity of their daily life is increasing by leaps and bounds. So I don't want to go on too long because I want to make sure there's time for the third speaker and also for us to have some question and answer and some discussion. But this is the basics of how fair trade works. And now I just want to say a few things about what we can do here in the United States. Fair trade certification, as Neil was talking about, happens through an international network of nonprofit organizations that follow up. The Fair Trade Labeling Organization goes to each country and makes sure that the cooperatives are democratic cooperatives and the farmers are running them themselves. they also make sure that the farmers are getting the fair price of at least $1.26 per pound. And that price can go up. They can receive, if their coffee, if the coffee market goes up, they can make $1.30, $1.40, $1.50, but there's always a minimum $1.26, sort of like a minimum wage. Just like in this country, it was only a few generations ago where we had sweatshops, and no matter how hard people worked, they would go hungry at night. Well, through the labor movement and through organizing, we were able to establish a minimum wage and something to make sure that every worker gets to have some basic standard of living. And I think a lot of us might agree that our current minimum wage is not enough. But even so, the point is that there's a minimum standard to make sure that people are getting by. So the Fair Trade Labeling Organization makes sure that the co-ops are democratic, they're being run by the farmers themselves, and they're paying the fair price. And the Transfair, which is the nonprofit group here in the United States, which has a bunch of sister organizations around the world that do this in other countries, Transfair goes to each coffee company that's a certified fair trade coffee roaster and make sure by checking every single bill of sale, when they import coffee, they look at every bill of sale and make sure that minimum $1.26 per pound went to the Farmers Cooperative. So there's this independent organization that is offering a guarantee that when you see this fair trade label on your coffee, if ever you see this on a package of coffee or a bin, at a bulk bin in a store, there's been a third-party organization that's made sure that the farmers are getting a fair price. So what can we do about it? Fair trade started about 15 years ago in the States through a cooperative itself called Equal Exchange. And for a number of years, they did their thing, and they were by themselves making sure that farmers were getting a fair price. Lots of other small companies, nonprofits, and for-profit companies got involved. And just 3 or 4 years ago, Transfair was established to have this third-party certification. What we can do here is to be demanding at our stores, at your neighborhood store, at your neighborhood cafe, if you're a student at your school, if you work at your place of work, if you go to church or a temple, or, synagogue or mosque, to be able to make sure that your place of worship also has fair trade coffee. Later in the afternoon, there's going to be a workshop. It's like an action workshop where we can talk a little bit more about some specifics. But it's really the way the fair trade is growing right now, and it's been doubling every year for the past couple of years. The amount of fair trade coffee that's being bought in the States, the way that's happening is people just like us in this room going to, and I'm sure some people here are already doing this and are already involved in fair trade. But I would ask every single person here to make a commitment to go to your store and ask for fair trade coffee. Even if you don't buy coffee, make sure that your friends or your family are buying fair trade coffee, or at your workplace, because that's one way that we can have a direct impact on the daily lives of coffee farmers around the world. And lastly, just to wrap up, I want to say that in Europe, there's because this has been going on for a while, and there's a more developed system. They have fair trade certified coffee, tea, sugar, bananas, oranges, hazelnuts, mangoes, all kinds of products that are all based on the same principles of making sure that farmers are getting a fair price. Not that they're getting a handout, but that they're getting a price that's fair in the first place. That pays the bills and guarantees a dignified standard of living. Now that's the direction that we're moving in the United States. We're just starting with coffee and tea, but there soon will be, hopefully, there will be fair trade certified chocolate. That's something the Global Exchange is working on. Is getting a campaign going to pressure chocolate companies to get fair trade chocolate. And in a few years, we'll have caught up to Europe and have all those different agricultural products, and making sure that fair trade is one alternative to creating a more just global economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you very much, Jeremy. One advantage of being the moderator is the ability to make 10-second editorial comments. This, 30-cent coffee to a farmer is not the result of Adam Smith's invisible hand of the free market. It's the result of World Bank-funded supposed economic development projects in Southeast Asia that put in massive, unsustainable coffee production is their model for economic development. Their model for economic development that has blown the price of coffee worldwide was to see if farmers in Southeast Asia could produce coffee for a few cents less than farmers in Africa. That's why coffee is 30 cents a pound to a farmer right now. It has nothing to do with the supposed free market. Anyway, and let me introduce Kevin Danaher from Global Exchange. Some of you heard him last night give us a very inspirational and rousing presentation. And with that, let you explain your pyramids. I love those.
Yeah, this is my non-verbal theory of international relations. Each big triangle is a nation. The little triangle at the top is the ruling elites who make policy. They form transnational alliances. If you unpack U.S. relations with Colombia, El Salvador, South Africa, Senegal, Russia, wherever, what you find is these lines, it's like a rope. If you cut it in cross-section, it's a lot of strings twisted together, and each string would be a loan from the World Bank with conditionality attached, a military agreement, General Electric building a nuclear power plant next to an active volcano, that's an actual example, et cetera, et cetera. The elites of third world countries have developed more accountability and connectivity to first world elites in Washington and Wall Street than they have connection and accountability to their own people. As long as this connection between third world elites and first world elites is stronger than the connection between third world elites and their own people, you will never have democracy, you will never have real development, what we would define, not World Bank, $190,000 a year PhD economists define as development, which obviously I think is garbage, but what we the people at the grassroots would define as real development, balanced, sustainable, healthy development. So our task is build this majority alliance that believes in life values so it's strong enough that it can disrupt this transnational elite alliance that's focused on money values. That's what happened in the anti-apartheid movement. That's where I got this nonverbal theory from, was a guy in South Africa who explained to me, he said, our struggle here is not for me to be able to put my ass on a toilet seat that some white guy sat on. It's to have freedom, democracy, liberty, control over our own economy, etc. And he said, if you really want to help us, meaning me, go back to your country and fix your country, because that's the big gorilla that's supporting our dictatorship here. And unfortunately, I'm sad to report that in my traveling to dozens of countries around the world, that's true in most places. Our government using our tax money and our law and violating our own law in many ways, which are, I could go off on a sidetrack on that, but I'll avoid it. They are creating a really bad reputation for we the American people, and it really pisses me off. If that's not obvious that I've got enough anger for 10 other people, I could go into details on where that came from. From seeing people bury small children, their family members, their children, and try to throw themselves into the graves when the funeral is going on, and the kid died of measles. The vaccine costs about 12 cents. This is totally inexcusable. So that's where my anger comes from, and I try to use it. I try to channel it. It's like, judo or something? You know, you take that negative energy and try and filter it and bioremediate it, psycho-remediate it, and send it back as positive energy. The last point that Cliff made about this free trade, it's not free trade, right? It sounds like free lunch, free sex, free love. It sounds real good, but it's not free trade. It's corporate-dominated trade. That's what it is. If you look at, and IATP does a lot of work on this, if you go into those rule-making bodies around the world where they actually write these rules, it's corporate interests. Or it's a person working for the government who came from the corporate sector and is going to go out the revolving door later with a bigger Rolodex and lots of government connections and phone numbers and buddy-buddy relations, and is going to go work for Monsanto or Genentech or whatever, or some weapons manufacturer, and then utilize that to further colonize our government. This society, this political system, was founded on the fundamental principle that sovereignty, which means ultimate political authority, ultimate political power. It comes from the Latin word for king, rex. Sovereignty resides where? In the Constitution, the President, Supreme Court, Congress? No. Resides in we the people. That's why our founding documents start out, we the people. Right? Second sentence of the Declaration of Independence. all people are created equal, right? It doesn't say all Americans. It says all people are created. They said men. They meant people. All people are created equal with inalienable rights. It means you cannot give those rights away, even if you want to. Like these people saying, "Oh, I'll give a little less civil liberties for more security." No, you miss the concept. You cannot give away inalienable rights, and inalienable rights cannot be taken away from you. If somebody tries to take them away from you, they are in the wrong. They are illegitimate. Any government that tries to take away basic inalienable human rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness is a big category. If your kids are hungry, you can't pursue happiness. Any government that tries to take away those rights by any mechanism is illegitimate, inherently, by definition. So I think it's important for us to remember we don't talk like this because we had a revolution 200 years ago, right? And I do not shy away from accepting that label on myself and my work as revolutionary. We need nothing short. And I'm into nonviolence. I'm a follower of Gandhi, Martin Luther King. If we mobilize enough people, we can do it nonviolently, but it means we got to recruit. And that's my pitch to you. Become recruiters. You are hereby ordained as recruiters in the global justice movement by the power vested in me, whatever. It's not essentially about trade. What it's about is writing the rules of global government to give capital and the movement of capital across all sorts of local, regional, state, and national boundaries more freedom of movement and more power than human beings. Currently, under NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, a Zenith television set has more freedom of movement than a Mexican human being. I find that disgusting and sick. There are more people dying each year crossing the Mexico-U.S. border than there were people who died crossing the Berlin Wall. The Berlin Wall, for you younger people who, have come to political consciousness since 1989, under communism, we were told, oh, this is horrible. This shows how evil, and it was evil, right, to contain people with a wall. Well, if more people are dying crossing the U.S. border, thank you, Bill Clinton, Operation Gatekeeper, build the fence bigger and further out into the desert so people die crossing that border because they're so poor they have to come here to get jobs. If those of you who've been to Mexico know Mexico is a rich country. It's not a poor country. It's got farmland, it's got resources, it's got creative people, a deep culture. There should be no hunger and no poverty in Mexico. As is true of Brazil. Argentina with an economic crisis? Excuse me, it's the size of India with the population of California. It's got agriculture, industry, infrastructure, highest literacy rate in Latin America. There should be no economic crisis in Argentina. But why? Think of the triangles diagram. Their policy was coming from wealthy people in Wall Street and Washington. And the government was bought off with an initial line of credit that was $39 billion. You put $39 billion on a table, people's eyes roll back in their heads. They'll do whatever you want them to do, including implementing stupid policies. So if you look at these institutions, North American Free Trade Agreement, Free Trade Area of the Americas, World Trade Organization, there's a fundamental lie embodied in the very names of these organizations, because they want we the people to think, oh, this is just about trade. You gotta have trade. Farmer produces wheat, you're a blacksmith making a shovel, you have to trade. It's been going on for thousands of years, and you know the bullshit story, right? And it's to get us focused away from essentially what's going on. And essentially what's going on is we are at the final level of constitutional development. There is a constitution being written for the entire planet, for every human being on the face of the earth, and for all species and all of nature. And the people who are writing that constitution want money values to dominate life values. They want commerce to dominate environment and human rights. And what we are saying in the movement is, no, commerce is just an activity. It's not sacred. Life is sacred, and life values need to dominate money values. And that's the core struggle on the planet today. If we allow money values and commerce to dominate life values, human rights, and the environment in the writing of the global constitution, we'll be screwed. Just think about 1780s Philadelphia. If it hadn't been just wealthy white males, at that table writing our Constitution. We wouldn't have had that stupid electoral college nonsense. We would have had direct election of the Senate, which didn't happen until relatively recently. Women wouldn't have had to struggle until 1920 to get the right to vote, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The constitutional moment is right at our doorstep. And a lot of our fellow citizens are running to the mall and worried about their all-terrain vehicle and the World Cup and all these other drugs that are forced on us to divert our attention from the key issue that's confronting us. So I could go into a lot of detail about the Free Trade Area of the Americas. I just want to highlight it for you. Free Trade Area of the Americas is an attempt by the Western Hemisphere governments, pushed by the U.S. and Canada, and to a certain extent Mexico, to expand NAFTA, which is U.S., Canada, Mexico, to the entire Western Hemisphere. If that happens, we are going to see an increase in inequality in our own country as well as in other countries. We're going to see the spread of GMOs. We're going to see increased environmental destruction. And we're going to see the codification into international law of a thing that's known as Chapter 11 of NAFTA. The North American Free Trade Agreement has a Chapter 11 is a chapter that allows companies to sue governments for the interruption of the profit cycle. So this is not hypothetical. This is already happening. The case of Ethel Corporation, a Virginia-based corporation that was producing a chemical additive for gasoline. It's an oxygenator for increased mileage and replacing lead in gasoline. The Canadian government passed a ban on this chemical because it was found to be toxic to the environment. The Ethel Corporation, under Chapter 11 of NAFTA, sued the Canadian government. Canadian government was forced to apologize, rescind the law, and pay $13 million in fines to the Ethel Corporation. The state of California is currently being sued by Methanex, a Canadian corporation, for a California government ban against the M in MTBE. MTBE is also a gasoline additive. It's very viscous. It gets into the groundwater systems, spreads rapidly, and it's a carcinogen. So our state legislature, you know, it's bad enough that our corporate-owned governor and our corporate-owned state legislature in California said, we got to ban this. There's a $900+ million lawsuit by Methanex, this Canadian corporation, against the state of California. In the adjudication process in Washington, D.C., which happens, by the way, in the World Bank, interestingly enough, that's where the records are kept and everything, the state of California does not even get allowed to have representation. We are represented by the USTR, the U.S. Trade Representative's Office, which is totally corporate, right? Totally bought off, totally in the hands of these big transnational corporations, and the state of California doesn't even have a live voice in the room. And yet we're being sued for $900 million. Absolutely insane. If you want that expanded to the whole Western Hemisphere, then just sit back, relax, don't get involved in this struggle. The reason why I pitched the FTAA is my organization, myself, we do a lot of work on this. We're trying to ring the warning bell. And we're doing a trip. If you ever wanted to go to Ecuador, interesting country, great people. In October, we're taking a group to Ecuador, which is the next meeting of the FTAA. The last one, you remember, was in Quebec City. I was there. I've never seen that much tear gas fired in all my life, and I've been in a lot of demonstrations. Thousands and thousands of rounds, the good old Royal Canadian Mounted Police fired at us, and it was mostly people like 19, 20, 17, 18 years old saying, excuse me, what's with the fence? Can't we participate in this debate about the rules of the planet? You know, the people in favor of democracy, and they tear gassed us. If you have to tear gas someone who has an opposing view, you lost the debate. It's like if we're having a debate and all of a sudden he punches me and knocks me out. He didn't win the debate. He lost the debate. When a government, whether it's a national or a global government, has to try to silence its opposition, that is a sign of moral and intellectual bankruptcy, I would argue. So we've already won. We've already won this struggle at the intellectual, moral, spiritual level. We've kicked their ass in the court of public opinion in terms of who cares and who pays attention. For 8 months now, Global Exchange and Jobs with Justice, 50 Years Enough Network, a coalition, we've been trying to get the World Bank and the IMF to debate us on global TV, and we got the BBC and WorldLink TV to agree to cover the costs of the global, the filming, the cameras, the distribution. 8 months we've been trying to get them to agree to this debate. Now, they have thousands of PhD economists, paid a lot of money. You think they're willing to debate us on TV? No. Well, what does that tell us, right? That they won't even submit to a public debate because they know we'd kick their ass, right? Because we'd be bringing people like Weldon Bello and Jokey Jehu and Vandana Shiva, etc., and they wouldn't have an answer to life values or money values. Which is sacred, life or commerce? They don't have an answer to that. So let me switch to the positive side. That's the bad stuff. There's a golden rule in every culture, right? And it's not he who has the gold makes the rules. That's what we've transformed it into here. It's do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Well, let's just, seeing as that's a universal cultural phenomenon, let's just take that word others and let's expand it to include all species, all life. Do unto others. Imagine if the sea turtles did to us what we're doing to them. They'd be walking down the street here in Missoula just slapping the hell out of us, right? We're destroying a species that has swam the ocean for tens of millions of years. They predate the dinosaurs, for God's sake. For God's sake. Yeah? Now, we're going to destroy them because shrimp corporations do not want to spend $400 on a turtle excluder device that you can put in your shrimp nets that let the shrimp through but catch the sea turtle and kick it out a side door. They don't want to spend that $400. They go to the World Trade Organization and say U.S. environmental regulations that prohibit the sale of shrimp caught without turtle excluder devices is a violation of free trade principles, and the World Trade Organization says you're right. So we can't enforce that law. I'll be damned. I will die before I will allow some international corporate organization based in Geneva, Switzerland, to tell me, an American citizen, what I can or cannot do as an American citizen in terms of U.S. law. If we allow that principle to be established at a global constitutional level, we're screwed. You might as well just put out your hands and let the manacles be put on. And I guarantee you, we can get dyed-in-the-wool Republican conservatives to back us on this. I do a lot of right-wing radio, and I love doing right-wing radio. Because you get guys calling in and say, you get the guy calling and saying, "You're an American? You're not an American, you're a communist." And then you get other guys calling and saying, "You know, this guy sounds like a communist, but I agree. These secret global government organizations are wrong." All right. Well, you don't have to agree 100% with somebody. You're not going to marry these people. We're talking about tactical political alliance for a crucial struggle, right? Even somebody you married, God knows, my wife and I don't agree 100% of the time, right? And people say, "Oh, but he's against abortion." That's another issue that you'll deal with. If you don't establish a respectful conversation with that person, you're never going to change their opinion about abortion or anything else. So it's about trust, and trust gets built one conversation at a time through honest expression of who I am to the other. And then the other does the same back, etc., etc. And we weave a web between us. But it has to be honest, and it has to be forthright. And I'm not saying, slam them in the face with your ideology, but let's start talking to people. Let's reach out. Let's play the role of recruiters to the global values revolution that wants life values to dominate money values. When we got past a piece of legislation in San Francisco for fair trade coffee, and this is something you can do. You got a good mayor here. You go to the mayor and say, "Mayor, we would like City Hall to only serve fair trade coffee inside City Hall." That's easy. Okay? I mean, if you can't do that, hang up your jockstrap as a citizen, okay? You failed if you can't get that little thing. But it's one little piece at a time. You crawl, then you walk, then you run, right? So you go to City Hall and you get that. So we did that in San Francisco, and of course, you have a ceremony for the media. And the mayor and the city council, they're going to be out there for the pouring of the first ceremonial cup of fair trade coffee. So we bring up a fair trade farmer from Nicaragua. This guy is the real thing. He's never been to Managua, let alone outside of Nicaragua. You got to get him a passport and plane tickets, all that kind of stuff. But he's the real thing. He's there with his cowboy boots and his hat, and he's this little guy, and he's humble and quiet. You got to tell him, hey, you got to speak up into the microphones. And all the media is there. And the media's first question is, what does fair trade mean to you? And the guy says, it means that now, instead of me having to carry these huge sacks on my back down the mountainside, I can afford a donkey. And I started to cry. I turned away. Are we asking too much? We're asking such a small thing. We're asking for a little bit of dignity so that human beings who provide the raw material for our morning latte don't have to be beasts of burden for us. Is that too much to ask? It's why human beings got organized in the abolitionist movement and got rid of slavery. It's how women got the right to vote, etc., etc. And people who started those struggles did not live to see the completion of the struggle. But they fought like hell anyway because they knew it was an important principle. It's the principle behind why you love your children, why you love your spouse, why you love anything in the world. It's that feeling of connectedness. So we have now reached a point where we can have global brain, where each of us can be a cell in a global brain. We can reach the level of connectivity that all the great spiritual leaders talked about, right? Love your neighbor as you love yourself was Jesus' second command. Love God above all else, and let's think of God as the creative force of life in the universe, whatever, de-religionize it if you need to, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. That's pretty simple stuff. But now we have the physical capability of bringing that into fruition, of making it concrete. So when people say, oh, you're not practical, no, we are the practical ones. We are the practical ones because we want to actualize that great vision that people on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday go to their place of worship and, that's nice. I love that stuff. I'm into meditating and prayer and paying attention. But let's make it real. Let's include everybody. No lifeboat ethic. Rent Titanic. And in the part where the rich people are leaving the boat in half-filled lifeboats, ask the audience, what do you think? What's your moral judgment about those people pulling away? And that's exactly what we're doing. If you live in an affluent part of the world and you're not struggling like hell to change the inequality and environmental destruction in the world, then you are the moral equivalent of the right-wing minister who sits on the Anti-Pornography Commission. He gets to look at it all and enjoy it and gets to denounce it. You get the best of both worlds. You go, oh, yes, I'm wringing my hands about global poverty. I'll write a check to Oxfam. Send them some food, No, I'm sorry. No, you have to risk something. You have to put your ass on the line in some way. You have to inconvenience yourself. We're all into this convenience. I'll go to 7-Eleven and pay twice what it's worth because it's more convenient. Let's bag that crap, okay? That's corrupting our culture. We got to get back to slow food, not fast food. Connecting is what it's about. The fair trade commodities were mentioned. I just want to throw in one point. Think about this. We usually tend to think too small. We got to start thinking big. Where do we want to end up? And I think where we want to end up, and people are already in the fair trade movement talking about this, if we got fair trade coffee and fair trade chocolate and fair trade orange juice and fair trade bananas and whatever, those are all sort of raw commodities. What about fair trade manufactured goods? What about fair trade sneakers with a stamp on them that says, we went to this factory, the workers were paid a decent wage, they only worked 8 hours a day, they had a weekend. Most of the workers in China making stuff for us, they don't get a weekend. They're lucky if they get Sunday off. You get workers that work a month at a time, 28 days at a time, paid $1 a day. No trade union rights, no right to peaceably assemble. No right to peaceably assemble? Assemble to just talk about issues? But all these companies, Intel, Hewlett-Packard, General Motors, Nike, they're all over there. Why? Yeah, because of the dictatorship. They can pay workers low and they can pollute the environment. And we buy the products and we invest our money in the stock of those companies. Ooh, there will be a judgment day, whether you believe in religion or not. There will be a judgment day. So someday we're going to have manufactured goods. When we were very involved in the Nike campaign, over 90% of the phone calls that came into our office during that campaign were some version of this. Hey, I agree with you, Nike sucks. What shoes do I buy? And right away I said, why isn't the movement producing a fair trade sneaker? Duh. I mean, does it take genius to manufacture something as simple as a sneaker? We can do that. So in our critique of capitalism and all this profit mongering in corporations, We have to extract from the existing system of enterprise the technical skills about producing goods. We have to produce goods and services, because everybody needs goods and services, minimum goods and services. I'm not talking about the Lexus, the golf courses, and all that garbage. But we need goods and services. Can we produce goods and services in a way that does not exploit human beings and does not exploit nature? Yes. Yes. You say to the factory, all of your exhaust pipes will be turned around in a U into your factory. Deal with it. And the design people can deal with it. Bill McDonough, people like this, they're doing this work. It exists, okay? But it's not currently profitable for corporations to do it. It's profitable for them to have McDonald's alive with a Hollywood movie company, Batman, and they have little Batman Robin toys that are going to be given out in the McDonald's. If you look at those toys, they're all made in China in a sweatshop with the plastic fumes and all this kind of stuff, giving people cancer. They're shipped across the Pacific Ocean. They're used as bait in the McDonald's to get kids to use pester power to drag their parents into a place to eat food that if you consistently eat it will kill you. And they make a hell of a lot of money doing it, and those toys are going to end up in the garbage in a week or two. That's the system we live in. It is not rational. It is not efficient. The only way it can be described as efficient is because they take the social and environmental costs and they make them exogenous to the calculation of efficiency. If you do full cost accounting, our entire economic system collapses. It all comes down, and all those economists in the World Bank and the IMF lose their jobs. Might not be a bad idea. I'd rather see it be a big daycare center or something. Let me end with this. I think what we need is we need to figure out how do you combine emergency heart, fix it yesterday, not tomorrow, and long-term intellect. Because think about the masons that laid the foundations of those cathedrals in Europe that took 400 years to build. They knew they wouldn't see the final product of their work. But they knew if they didn't do very solid, precise work, there was going to be a lot of weight coming on top of their work in future generations, and it had to be really solid and precise. That's our job. This generation alive today is responsible for building the foundation of a future democratic, ecologically sustainable global economy with not one starving child and no clear-cut forests. That will come about. The question is, how long is it going to take? Is it going to take 150 years and massive apocalyptic destruction before we wake up to that? Or can we do it in 40 or 50 years, which would be really cool? And I think that's doable. So let's go out there and let's recruit, because the more people we bring into this movement, the easier it's going to be for each one of us. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay. Well, so I'll try to touch on the three questions here about coffee real quick. First of all, okay, so the $1.26. The $1.26 price historically comes from before in the 70s and 80s. There was an international group that was called the International Coffee Association. I think it was ICA. Basically, it was sort of like OPEC, you know, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. These countries get together. They say, okay, we have this valuable product. Let's figure out how much a good price is going to be, and we can have some control of the world market over how much we're going to make for it. That was the ICA. Now, because of neoliberal economic thinking and like getting government out of the way, you know, that the market should rule everything, then the United States government, the World Bank, and the IMF convinced countries to just get rid of the ICA and let farmers fend for themselves with the coffee market. So that $1.26 was the amount that was being paid historically that coffee-producing countries already had set as a fair price. Now it's the Fair Trade Labeling Organization. They continue to revise that, and they do economic analysis of how much it costs to be a coffee farmer in all the different countries of Africa, Latin America, and Asia, and they figure out that $1.26 is still a pretty good price to guarantee a basic, dignified life for coffee farmers.
It's a floor price.
What's that?
It's a floor price.
Exactly. It's a floor price. It's a minimum price. It can go higher, but it's the minimum. It's the floor price. And I'll try to be real quick. I don't want to take up all the time here, but about the price breakdown. Why is it that we pay $10 or $12 per pound for a pound of coffee, right? And the farmers get so little? Well, again, it's all about the say this is $12, or like $10 a pound, right? Just to make it an even number. A whole bunch of that money stays in the United States, for example, for the coffee roasting companies, the retailers. I mean, supermarkets make a killing. Supermarkets always make the most amount of money of a particular agricultural product. And then there's the middlemen in the other countries that also, like I mentioned before, there's like the processors, and there's the exporting company, and there's the local coyotes that are the middlemen that actually go around and buy coffee from the small farmers and give them chump change. So that's part of why we can pay so much, and the farmers are still only getting 20 or 30 cents per pound. The difference with fair trade that we didn't touch on before is that instead of having you here at the end of the line, right, and the local company, like your local cafe or something, paying to all these middlemen, the way it works is instead the roaster, the coffee roasting company, if it's fair trade certified, they buy directly from the source, from the fair trade farmers cooperatives. The farmers get together, and as a cooperative, they become their own exporting company. They collect their coffee, they clean it, they process it, they package it, and they export it. And they cut out all these levels of middlemen who are taking all the profits. That's, in addition to the minimum price of the floor price of $1.26, that's one key part of fair trade. The other key part is direct trade, of cutting out the middlemen.
If I can ask you to expand on that, is there not violent resistance to that kind of cutting out of all those people in the local community?
Historically, there has been some violent resistance. I mean, some of the farmers that have come here to speak from Mexico and Nicaragua have said, yeah, when we got started 5 or 10 or 15 years ago, sure, my grandfather was murdered, my uncle was murdered, my so-and-so, there is a crackdown. But you know what this one guy from Oaxaca said? He said, you know what, no matter how much violence they unleash on us, we were united. And together, people can accomplish anything.
So it was not effective in keeping it from happening?
No. Not in the cases I've heard about anyway.
So let's just take a little bit of that lesson and apply it to the example of fair trade chocolate. You guys want to produce fair trade chocolate here in Montana using cocoa powder produced in the Montana sister city in Columbia. You've got a research agenda that needs to be done, from visiting there and finding out what their production methods are there any efficiencies that can be gained? Can they cut out middle people? Can it be made profitable to import that stuff and process it into chocolate? Is it better to process there? Is it better to process it here? Process it in San Francisco, whatever. Do all that research and find out, is there a way to make a profitable nonprofit? Like Global Exchange is a nonprofit. We're a 501c3. But we make profits. It's a question of, do you exploit people and exploit the environment in making them? And then when you get that profit, what do you do with it? Do you put it back into the work, or put it into your BMW and your cocaine habit? Whatever. We can change all this. We can use the techniques of enterprise to help get the movement forward, and then the money that we generate can be used for all sorts of useful projects. And then just one thing on the state constitution. You should check a website, POCLAD, POCLAD.org. It's Program on Corporations, Law, and Development, based back east. And they raise this issue of all corporations are chartered by state constitutions and are given the right to exist and do what they do. And around the country now, there is a movement to question corporate charters and say to these corporations that are screwing us in one way or another, we will give you the death penalty. We will take away your corporate charter. We will cease you existing, right? And that can be done because the Constitution is our document. It represents we the people. The word corporation does not appear in the U.S. Constitution, but over 200 years they have gradually grabbed more and more power, so that when Vermont passed a state law requiring labeling of milk, whether it had bovine growth hormone in it or not, the Dairy Association went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that First Amendment rights of a corporation as a person also gives you the right to not speak. So they don't have to label whether they have bovine growth hormone in their milk. I don't know about you. I find that particularly outrageous and idiotic. But that's based on this mythology of a corporation is a human being. It's not. It's not. We all know it. So if we developed a national movement to have a constitutional amendment to the U.S. Constitution, 7 words: a corporation is not a human being.
Right on.
Who's going to stand up in Congress and say, oh no, a corporation is a human being? You can't make that argument. Right? So if we drag that debate out into the public arena, we can spank them with it.
Right.